All right, so next we're going to do polynomial long division, and that's when we divide by a binomial instead of a monomial. But I just want to remind you of long division in general, and because it's the same principles for the most part. So first of all, if I'm trying to divide 482 divided by 23, this is how we set it up, right? So we put the divisor here. This is the dividend, and then this is the quotient. In case those are just mathy terms. But so first I'm going to do how many times does this go into this, right? And because we know that 23 can't go into 4 alone. So one way to kind of think of it is how many times does 2 go into 4, and it goes in twice. So that kind of helps us to get an idea. And so remember, after you do that, then you multiply 2 times 23, and that gives you 46, and you put that number down there, right? And then what do? We subtract, right? A lot of times we don't put a minus here, but we subtract these values, and then we get this new value down here. And then what we do is we bring down the next value, then we go through the process again. How many times does 23 go into 22, right? So we're kind of ignoring this now, and we're just looking at this. So how many times does 23 go into 22? 0 times, right? And then we do the process again. 0 times 23 is 0. Then we subtract. So 22 minus 0 is 22. So now this is our remainder, right? And so sometimes you see people write it as a remainder 22, or sometimes you see people write it as 20 and then 22 over 23, right? So you might see it as a fraction where you put the divisor as the denominator, right? And the remainder as the numerator, all right? And then you can convert that to a decimal if you wanted to as well. But anyway, all right. So let's take a look at this long division problem. So here we're taking this polynomial here and dividing it by this binomial, right? So this polynomial with 4 terms divided by a polynomial with 2 terms. So the first thing I'm going to do is set it up just like we saw in the earlier, in the example that we just did with regular long division. So it's going to be, I'm going to put the divisor here, right? And then I'm going to put the dividend inside. All right. Now, one thing that has to be true, and we'll see this in the next example, is these have to be sequential, right? So w cubed, w squared, w to the first, w to the 0, right? So 3, 2, 1, 0. Make sure that you have those sequential. If you don't have any, if any are missing or out of order, make sure you put them in order, and then any that are missing, you're going to put a placeholder there, and I'll show you how to do that later. All right, so for right now, what we're going to do is, I don't have anything missing, so this is good the way it is. But what I want to do is I want to start with this term. I'm just going to focus on this term, and I'm going to say, okay, how many times does this term go into this term? Okay, so kind of in my head or on paper, I'm going to do 3w cubed divided by w, right? And that gives me 3w squared, right? So 3w squared is what goes here. All right, and then what do we do next? We multiply, right? So I'm going to take this 3w squared that I just got, keep it in green, 3w squared, and now I'm going to multiply it by w plus 3. So I'm just going to distribute that, and so I'll get 3w cubed plus 9w squared, right? So 3w cubed plus 9w squared. And you don't have to write it, all this stuff over here. I just want to kind of show you that work on how I'm getting all this stuff over here, okay? So now remember, what we do is we subtract. So even though we don't usually put a minus when we're doing long division, here we're going to do it because just to make sure that we get that we don't miss out on the fact that we're subtracting, right? Because sometimes when you subtract, you end up adding and things like that. So I'm just going to be very clear with the sign. So what I do is I circle them just to know that I already changed the signs, okay? Because when you subtract, you change the signs, right? If you think of it as like this, a negative outside, you would distribute that -1 and change both signs, okay? So what's going to happen when I subtract is these will cancel out, and then and that should always happen. These first two should always cancel out, and then here we have 7w squared minus 9w, and so then we end up with negative 2w squared, right? 7 minus 9 is negative 2. Then I'm going to bring down this minus 4w. And now we're going to go through the process again. So now I'm looking at, okay, so remember we kind of ignore this now, and now I'm just looking at this right here. So I want to start with this first term with this term. Okay, that's how we always start. So negative 2w squared divided by w. So I'm going to start this process all over again, right? Negative 2w squared divided by w, that equals negative 2w, right? Put that in green. Negative 2w, so I'm going to put that up here. Okay, and then what are we going to do? We're going to multiply this by this, right? So I'm going to take negative 2w and multiply it by w plus 3. So I distribute, so I get negative 2w squared minus 6w. So I'm going to put that here. Negative 2w squared minus 6w. Okay, now what I have to do is subtract. So what I'm going to do is change the sign. So this is going to become a positive, and this is going to become a positive. So what happens is these cancel out, just like they should. These first two terms should always cancel out. And then the second term is negative 4w plus 6w is positive 2w. So then I bring down this 3. And the process starts over again, right? So now I'm going to do this divided by this, right? 2w divided by w. And that just equals 2, right? So I'm going to put a 2 here, positive 2. And then now I'm going to take that 2 and I'm going to multiply it by w plus 3. So I'm going to multiply 2 times w plus 3. And so I'll distribute, so it becomes 2w plus 6. And that's what we put down here, 2w plus 6. All right, and then we can subtract. So remember, we're going to change the sign. So this turns to a negative. This turns to a negative. So these cancel out just like they should. 3 minus 6 is negative 3. All right, and once we get down to a constant, and once we have a constant up here, that means we're done. And so this becomes our remainder, right? So what I'm going to do when we're doing polynomial long division is we write this as a fraction. So sometimes people put remainder negative 3, but we'll keep it as a fraction. So what we'll do is we'll put that negative 3 into a fraction. So we'll put minus 3 over, and then our denominator is going to be w plus 3. Okay, so the remainder goes on top. Whatever sign the remainder has is going to go there, and then the divisor becomes the denominator, just like it did with long division with fractions, except for, or with integer values, except for we're just going to have a plus or minus there between. So that's our answer there. All right, so that's how we do polynomial long division.